All right, welcome in to another Beyond the Arc. Bill Ryder, Brad Botkin is back for a little end of the week special Southwest Division preview. Before we get to the hoops, though, you kind of had my mind just racing about the idea that I could shotgun a beer and get a stroke off. Any stories, any golf rounds of notes since we talked to you earlier in the week?
Yeah, we've been playing up here in Bend, Oregon. I was telling you guys off air that I ran into this really cool thing where this course has a 5-hole par 3 loop that you can do around the driving range. So you never have to leave this like area of the driving range, and you can like work on different shots and do the segues around. And if you're like, it's just, I've never seen anything like that. You have to have the land to do
Right.
it, but it's really neat. But uh, really playing golf with my friends from college, and I was talking with Aaron offline. Is there any better place to be with old friends than on the golf course?
No, I mean, like, I don't golf much anymore because in LA you have to really be committed to golfing. Where I live, like it's an hour, but I'd still do golf trips with the boys sometimes, just because drink some beer, get some fresh air,
Right.
right? Put up a score or
It's the
so,
best. It's the best.
120. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's cool, dude. I'm glad you're having fun. All right, let's dive into this baby. Let's just start with the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, great season last year. I mean, they got dominated in the finals, but they got all the way to the finals. They had Klay Thompson. They had Spencer Dinwiddie. They had Quentin Grimes. And who do they lose? Josh Green is out. Tim Hardaway Jr. is out, and Derrick Jones Jr. is out. I guess Clay's the big addition. We can take this anywhere you want, but was last year? Let's start here, Brad. Based on the moves that have been made, Dallas a rising force in a really interesting West, or was that a one-off and they need to have enjoyed that magic while it lasted?
No, I don't think it was a one-off, but I do think it's something that could be a one-year thing. Just because we talked about this, when we looked at the Pacific Division, the West is just so stacked, and there's such little separation between so many teams. It's just really not hard to imagine any team from the Pelicans to the Nuggets of going backwards in the standings or going up. So there's certainly, I wouldn't be shocked to see Dallas fighting to stay out of the play-in, being at the
Wow,
sixth. At the sixth.
really?
No, because I really think all these
That
teams.
feels low.
It does when you say that, but realistically, there's going to be three games separate
Yeah,
the 5 seed and the 8 seed. So, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see them up above the 4 either. So, I think Dallas had a good offseason. I think you can
I did too.
I think you can make a case that all these were like lateral moves, except for Klay. I think Klay is a clear upgrade from Tim Hardaway Jr. Najee Marshall and Derrick Jones Jr. I think
Najee Marshall. Yeah, yeah.
I like Najee Marshall. He's not as athletic, but he's strong defensively. He's a wing guy, 6'7", 6'8", can guard multiple positions. I like him. And Quentin Grimes, it depends if you're getting the guy that was kind of starting to show out for the Knicks, or the guy that fell off. If you get the guy that was starting to show out, I think that the Mavericks had a really good offseason. But Klay, to me, is the one big obvious
I,
upgrade. He's much better than Hardaway.
I think there's three. Like for me, there's three questions about Dallas. I'm with you that other than Klay, sort of feels like a net neutral in terms of the ins and the outs. So question one for me is just Luka. I mean, he's obviously a top conservatively 5 player in the NBA, but for him to elevate what he can do to an MVP level season would be significant. The Klay factor, I think, is really interesting, and I think it's a huge question mark. And I like it. I think it's a great addition. I think Klay not having to carry the baggage of who he used to be with the Warriors is significant. He can be the third guy now. Doesn't have to worry about keeping this dynasty alive. And then this was a team whose defense drastically improved at the back end of the season last season after the trade deadline. I know those are moves from last year, but they were significant. Is this Dallas defense really this good? Like, are they able to have a top 10, 11, 12 defensive rating over the course of an entire season? Because if they are, to me, they're a top 4. I think they're a top 4 team if you buy all of those things heading in a relatively good direction, Brad. I'm with you on Klay. I think the question is, does he start or does he come off the bench? And I'm not even sure it's that significant in the short term, as long as he can reclaim some of that offensive excellence he showed at times with the Warriors. Doesn't have to be a two-way defensive star. He's not that guy anymore, but the guy's obviously a champion, and it's a nice little bit of offense to put around Kyrie and Luka.
I agree with you. So here's two things on Klay that you sort of touched on. Does he start or does he come off the bench? If he starts, and then you say, okay, they have to maintain the defense. Okay, pretty tough to maintain a top 10 defense when 3 of your 5 starters are close.
Yes, which is why I think he's on off the bench, right? Like super sub.
Okay.
That's what I'm probably doing.
Okay, so maybe that's, and then the other part, the good side of Klay is that the Mavericks are a relatively stationary team, so they do a lot of one-on-one creation with Kyrie and Luka. I think that movement that Klay brings from Golden State is going to open that offense up a little bit, as long as Jason Kidd and them commit to actually letting that movement work and not just making Klay stand in the corner. So I think the movement that he brings is going to make the penetration of Kyrie and Luka. You're not going to totally be able to have 10 eyes on those guys with the ball. There's not still, even the success we saw the Warriors have with all of this movement, there's not enough teams that move like that. And Klay is the best off-ball mover outside of Steph in the league still, even if his shot isn't quite as deadly. The movement, I think, is going to open that offense up in different ways. So I like the movement part of it. I like the spacing that it's going to provide for those two creators. I just wonder if they can, to your point, I wonder if they can maintain the defense with a closing lineup that have 3. At this point, Klay's a bad defender. You have 3 bad defenders. You're really depending on Najee Marshall to come in and do what Derrick Jones Jr. did, Gafford to be this awesome rim protector and lively. You got to make up for a lot.
I'm with you, and he has to close. By the way, and we don't have to belabor this, they have 2 bad defenders and a guy in Luka who chooses, not, I think, not to be a good. I mean, Luka's big enough and athletic enough that for him to be the MVP is not the same thing as him making a leap defensively, but it would be amazing to see him just put a little more effort in to just close. Like, this is a really imperfect comparison, but Stephen Curry's not a great defensive player in isolation, but in the years where the Warriors had great defensive teams, he could operate in his role. He led the league in steals one year, right? He put in the effort.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't his strength. And I think Luka doing that maybe helps a little bit. Let me answer this really quickly, and we don't have to belabor it if you don't want to. I think everybody is assuming, and I'm assuming too, that Kyrie is going to be awesome again. It's not like he has had multiple years in a row where he's drama-free and he's injury-free and he's getting along with his teammates. Right. I mean, injuries are hard to guess, but it certainly seems like all indications are he likes being there and he's sort of about basketball now. Any concerns on any of those fronts? Drama, injury, shenanigans?
Yeah. I think that when you ask about the Mavericks as a whole, were they a one-off? I think you can narrow that down to Kyrie. Like, this was really the 1 year out of the last 5 that was a one-off. And so can he do that again? And all that stuff encapsulated the drama, the health, just how well he played. He was awesome, which he generally does that when he's right. I mean, if you're banking on Kyrie seasons, odds would say, but to your point, maybe we shouldn't be holding the Boston experience and the Brooklyn experience, because maybe he does seem like he's in a different place. He's happy there.
Seems like he likes it.
Yeah. So maybe that makes a difference. But I like your point about Luka trying, because he was so bad in the finals in the first couple games. He was getting picked on. So he was losing those games for them defensively. And he caught so much hell for it. And I wrote a pretty scathing article about it. And then he came back in game 4 that they won, and he was really good. And
he can do it.
I was on HQ and I was talking with Chris Hassel, and I told him, I said, it was so my wife, she never cooks. I'm the cook in the family.
Oh, where are we going here?
My wife never cooks, ever. Okay. And so it was Father's Day, and she was saying, I'm going to make dinner tonight. And it was really good. It was one of the better meals I've had in a while. And it reminded me of Luka playing defense in game 4, which is that all you did was tell me that you were capable of this all the time. If you wouldn't have played in game 4, if you would have been crap, then I would have said he can't play defense. My wife can't cook. Well, my wife can cook. It's just the effort. So
it's not a skill issue. It's a will issue. It is the will to do it.
That's exactly right.
All right. Really quickly, I know we're on a time crunch. Before we get to best and worst, Klay, obviously, as a Warrior is really weird. I am not a Warriors fan like you and producer Aaron, so I'm kind of bummed, but I'm also happy for him that maybe he gets sort of a second act in a different role, and maybe he has some basketball joy, because he wasn't happy.
No.
He wasn't happy last season with the Warriors. How about you? Hurt your heart? Glad to see the guy have something. Maybe where are you at on this?
I'm too old to get too nostalgic about.
You're
this
jaded.
Stuff. Yeah, I think that he had his time with the Warriors, and I'm happy that everyone in our careers, sometimes you just go someplace new and you're not held to the
Yes.
baggage that you were and with the Warriors, he was constantly being held to the standard of old Clay. I think he gets a fresh start where he can be what he is today and be appreciated for it. Whereas with Golden State, it was always, but he's not what he used to be. And I think that's going to be good for him.
Yeah. Even coming off the bench, right? Story in Golden State.
That's right.
If it happens in Dallas, it happens in Dallas. Best for me is Clay, right? Like best move. Obviously, I love it. I love it for Dallas. And I don't really have a worse move. I mean, I'm sort of net neutral, like I said, on sort of their ins and their outs. But I will go maybe. Luka's not known for being the guy that's in amazing shape and obviously played some intense basketball in the offseason with the Olympics. So maybe just a slight concern that he's going to be, a little worn out and or just not in the shape. But I'm actually not that. I don't really have a worst. Do you have a worst? Do you have a best?
It's dependent. So my best is Clay. I think he's a clear upgrade. Even at the player he is today, he's a clear upgrade from Hardaway. The worst is going to be if Najee Marshall can't replicate the on-ball athletic defense that Jones – that was a big part of them being able to defend perimeter scorers, Jones, that is. If Najee Marshall, if they can't piece together a perimeter defense with those three guys, Luka, Kyrie, and Clay that we mentioned, that's a big loss. So if Najee comes in and replaces that, which he's a good defender, then I'm with you, kind of a lateral move. But if he doesn't, that's a loss.
All right. I think we're both sort of like vaguely bullish on. I think we have realistically positive views on Dallas. I think New Orleans is a little more complicated. I think you can sort of see the good and the bad and the ugly. So we're going to get into the Pelicans. Pretty big addition. I think it's a big season for Zion. Brad Botkin, I'm Bill Ryder. We break down the Pelicans in our Southwest Division preview next here on Beyond the Arc. All right, back on Beyond the Arc. I'm still Bill Ryder. He's still Brad Botkin. I think New Orleans is really interesting. Obviously, DeJounte Murray comes in that trade with the Hawks. Bunch of guys go out. Brandon Ingram's still there. Maybe that's a bit of a surprise. Let me set this context up and then have at it, Brad. I actually think New Orleans, not a raw deal. I think they might be better than the end of their season suggested. They were almost a top 10 offensive and defensively rated team last year. I think that there's something really interesting there, especially with Murray. They just ran into the Thunder, and I'm not sure we realized how soon the Thunder were until they dominated New Orleans. I think they swept them. They swept them in that playoff series. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about New Orleans if Zion can, again, like last year, play a bunch of games. Are you feeling? Are you with me? Are you feeling good about what's going on in New Orleans?
I love New Orleans.
You love them.
I always have to couch all of these conversations with there's how I feel about them as a team, and there's how I feel about them in the mix of the Western Conference. I think the Lakers are a good team. There's a lot of the Mavericks I think Phoenix could be good, but the West, it's just going to be not hard for any of these teams to end up as the 9th seed, and it looks like he had a terrible season. I like
only some teams can also be the 4th seed, and I think New Orleans is in that category for me. Okay. I think their range is higher than the Lakers for me. Okay,
and I don't think many people would argue with that on paper. I think Zion has got to be the guy that can, for a full season, he's got to be healthy. We've seen when he's been healthy, he's been one of the best players in the league. So we talk about, is it a 1-year thing? He was healthy last year. Can he do it again? Can he play 65, 70 games? I like the Murray addition because he proved to me in Atlanta he's a little bit better of an off-ball player, a shooter, a catch-and-shoot guy than I thought. We're playing with Trae Young.
Yeah.
And
maybe
Zion,
develop some of that there too, right? Like had to do it for long stretches. Yeah.
And the thing is the ball has to be in Zion's hands. It's too difficult to navigate with him being a non-shooter, to get him the touches and the usage that he needs, to have him the ball in his hands at the end of the shot clock when he doesn't have it. I think he's really good at getting 2 feet in the paint. kicking to shooters. He's a pretty good I think he has to control the ball. And so
I agree.
Around him.
But is he a point center then? Because the center position's kind of a weird.
Well, we're going to get to biggest problem. But yeah.
Yeah. It's a funky situation because Ingram, I think, I could still move, right? I mean, I think if Paul George, if the Clippers, like these dominoes, if the Clippers don't screw up Paul George and Paul George doesn't go to the Sixers, I think Daryl's probably desperate enough in Philly to maybe try to make a move for Brandon Ingram. And so sometimes I think we haven't figured out with the new CBA how the market maybe is going to be tighter sometimes than we expect with some of the limitations. So Ingram's there is interesting. Obviously, I don't know where you come down on CJ McCollum.
I'm McCollum rider guy. I mean, it's like
I used to be, but dude,
when you go out to the playground, like you just need a guy that is so dependable. I'm up here in Oregon. I'm feeling the McCollum spirit. It's like that guy can just get buckets. I love him. The problem is with right now, as the team is currently constructed, DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, and Brandon Ingram are largely the same player. They are self-creation mid-range players.
Yeah.
So right now, the biggest loss of we're getting out of order here, but they need to trade Ingram. They didn't get it done now. They don't want
to move up. You don't want to move up for McCollum. I mean, that's an interesting the contract. Like, I would rather have Ingram, by the way. I would, but they obviously don't feel the same way.
They're going to have to pay him though. He's coming up. They're going to have to pay him a max. That's why he wasn't tradable.
How are you going to get? You can't recruit people to that city. I mean, like you've already lost two generational. If you include CP3, two generational talents just in this cycle of basketball. And so I think it's a market where you have to overpay.
Yeah, but right now they need a big. They need to go out and get size. And I think I just don't think they want to pay. We talk about the second apron. He's like a younger Paul George. Clippers didn't want to commit to Paul George. I don't think the Pelicans, the Kings were in the mix. Instead, they went with DeRozan. Nobody wants to pay Ingram that max contract that's coming.
Right. They need Philly to be desperate, I think.
So I think they're going to be looking to trade him up until February. And so that's sort of like an incomplete. But I think, he was unplayed. He wasn't getting minutes in the playoffs down the stretch. Like there's some weird fit things. Again, he's not an off-ball player. He wants to have it. He wants to survey. He wants to get his rhythm dribble and pull up for his mid-range. And Zion is sort of a worthless player when he's lingering off ball. So
you've got four guys who need the ball in their hands. It's an interesting. Although, as you noted, I think Murray can facilitate for some other guys, and I think in Atlanta he learned just because of Trae Young. He developed maybe a muscle that he had not had to utilize as much, which is being off ball.
But when you got three of those guys,
I get it. Yeah. So Murray's a nice addition. All right. Best and worst. I think we both agree worst is not moving on from Ingram, or at least moving on from one of those guys, and it's probably Brandon.
Well, it's not moving off Ingram, but what they likely could have gotten for Ingram, they have no center. They're going to start and they're next. Okay, so these six guys they're fantastic perimeter defensive team. They Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, McCollum, Zion, Ingram. All these guys are starters. They're all perimeter players.
The first two guys, top 7 perimeter defenders in the NBA.
Yeah. So, but they have no size. I mean, I think right now it's Daniel. They picked up Daniel Tice, I believe.
They added Tice. Yeah.
So it's like and I think Ingram is either that or McCollum. Some kind of trade is what addresses that. So it's sort of like it's not trading Ingram because I don't think he fits playing without the ball. And Zion needs the ball, but also what you're probably going to get back. They just don't have any center. So I think that's a big problem.
So you're not buying the Zion can play center, go small.
No,
promise he'll get banged up. He'll get banged up. Anyway.
Not for 40 minutes a game. Like if that were true, the Warriors would have played the death lineup the whole game. You can't do that.
It's probably an incomplete picture of who they're going to be when we get
maybe because nobody right now nobody wants Ingram. So I would say that.
Yeah, I mean,
so who are they going to trade him to? They're going to be trying.
I mean, give it time. Give it time for guys, teams to get desperate, dudes to get hurt. I'm with you. I like Ingram in the right fit. Best move. What do you got?
Well, Murray's the best move. I mean, I like him. He's good.
I do too.
And it's a talent upgrade. It's sort of like DeRozan in Sacramento. Like some of these teams, you're adding talent, and he's a good player.
I think it's the same thing we talked about on Monday with Sacramento. If you can't recruit guys through free agency, you have to take risks or overspend to bring in talent because that's the only way. Same is true not far from where you're sitting in Portland. All right, Houston was really interesting last year. A lot better, I think, than people thought they were going to be. Had a really strong finish. They were great defensively, kind of mediocre offensively, but incredibly young team. AJ Griffin joins the team, re-signed Aaron Holiday. I mean, they're young. Şengün's going to be back from being hurt. They've got probably, we were talking about great coaches. We were talking like a Monday, 3, 4, 5 days ago, about like how good some of these coaches are. Houston's got a coach who might be wrapped in some controversy from his time in Boston, and the sample size is kind of small. But this dude's pretty extraordinary and obviously really good with young players. What is a successful season in Houston? I don't think, again, it's crowded.
Good. Again, yeah, in the context of the Western Conference, very difficult to gauge. But I think that's a great point. It was the first thing I was going to say about Houston. I would put Ime Udoka in the needle mover category.
You would, needle mover.
Yeah, he really actually moves the needle of a team. That was a good team last year. I don't think there's a young group of players that you could be more excited about other than OKC than Houston. You've got to love all their guys in the development. I think it was they overpaid in a vacuum for Fred VanVleet, but they wanted to be good right away, and they were.
I liked it.
Stability.
And put the right guy around young players, right? Like that's long-term thinking.
I agree.
And Reed Shepherd drafted third.
Oh, I love it. But
which is a really nice pick.
Always partial to shooters, but yeah. And what I'll be interested in long-term is if he makes Jalen Green expendable, because I don't know if he can be if he's going to be more of a shooter, if he can run a team. But those two guys together are probably difficult size-wise in the backcourt. And Jalen Green, with the way he played, at the end of the year is a huge, huge trade chip. I'm curious how quickly the Rockets could go from young and promising to really good with a move.
It's the Thunder model, right? Like you make a big leap, you have some redundancies, but they're talented redundancies. Right. You can move guys when you need to.
That's right.
You can go get an upgrade or just keep stocking picks for whenever the time is to strike.
That's right.
The thing is, so I'm a big believer that, and I'm sure you are too, like 20-25 game sample size is a legitimate sample size to sort of make an evaluation of a team. And normally that evaluation comes in the front end of the first 25 games of a season. You sort of know who a team is. But Houston was so young, and Udoka is trying to figure out things. That the fact that Houston last year in their last 25 games were really, really good and really competitive and a tough out and kind of pushed down to the wire, they could be a play-in team. I don't know that they will be for the reasons we've discussed. There's just so many teams in the West that think they have a chance. But I think play-in for Houston is a very realistic out. To your point, you're a play-in team if it goes well. Play-in team this year, and then a legitimate playoff team maybe a year from now, and then 2 or 3 years if all these guys develop the right way. Maybe you can be somewhere between the Thunder and the Magic as sort of where you're at.
I think that's fair. I just Jalen Green is the guy. I mean, Şengün to me is awesome. He's the best player. He's a mini Jokic. So I'd be building largely around him. I mean, they obviously have Jabari and they have a lot of talent. But Jalen Green is a guy that I'm watching. I talked to a scout a couple weeks ago who really compared him to Malik Monk. And I think if you gave Malik Monk a team, he could do a lot of exciting things. But on a competitive team, he's probably a microwave scorer, 30 minutes a game. And so if Jalen Green is actually that and not this franchise tent pole that maybe he looked like in a short sample size at the end of last year, you can kind of maybe get ahead of the curve on him and get a lot of value. I don't know that they would ever trade him. He's just somebody that in my mind, I'm not.
No, it's interesting.
But he has so much value right now, and he's so intriguing athletically and scoring wise. You could get a lot for him, and with Reed Shepherd in place, he's a guy I'm kind of watching for a team like Orlando that needs someone on a younger timeline and needs a ball handler and a guy to lead the offense. Maybe a Spurs team that's going to be looking down that road.
Yeah, the Spurs are interesting. We'll get to them in a second.
He's a guy that I'm watching, but yeah, overall, I love the Rockets. I love Udoka. I think they're really good, and I don't think a play-in spot would be out of the question.
All right, my best is a combo. The good luck in the lottery to get Shepherd is obviously one of them. And just Şengün coming back, I know that's not really an off-season move, but it's a big off-season reality. And he was their best player when he was healthy, but they played really well when he wasn't there. And so I think he's going to return to a team as the best player on that team that's markedly better than the team that maybe was there when he was playing with him. How about you? Give me you got a best, and I don't really have a worst for Houston because they are in a build. They made that offseason trade with Brooklyn and Phoenix involved in the picks.
If I would have, so I'm with you. Reed Shepherd's the best thing that happened to them this summer. That regarding that trade that you're referencing, even if the Nets wouldn't have traded Mikal Bridges if they hadn't also got this deal to get their own picks back, and then that justifies them tanking. Even if they would have kept Mikal Bridges, they weren't going to be very good. Those Nets picks are pretty valuable. Now they end up getting some, like the Suns could go off a cliff here in a couple of years. I
think they will go off a cliff.
So they got some control of the Suns picks. So that's not terrible, but I think there's a world where they don't give those picks back to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn kind of still caves on a Bridges deal and ends up being really bad anyway, because New York overwhelmed them. I don't think they could have turned that deal down, even if they didn't have their own. So maybe they end up being terrible. Rockets don't cave, and they end up with the third pick next year in a deep draft. That could be a loss.
It's kind of, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I also don't mind them sort of operating on the long term and the medium term, just like Presti did. So we're doing these rankings or these previews in order of how teams finished the year before. So normally, more or less, we're sort of going down in quality and therefore going down in the level of sort of how interesting they are. The next two teams that we're going to get to in a sec here, I think are utterly fascinating, and maybe people have forgotten about one and underestimated the leap the other can make. Memphis and the Spurs. Woo. Man, the West is going to be awesome. When we come back, Brad Bach and I'm Bill Ryder. When we come back next year on Beyond the Arc.
There are some things in life that you can't quite explain.
An extraordinary story.
Maybe it sounds flawless, looks effortless, or makes you feel like a part of history.
The first ever goal for BFC.
And when all of those phenomenons come together, it's perfect. Pitch perfect.
All right, welcome back into Beyond the Arc. He is Brad Bach, and I am Bill Ryder. Human nature, Brad, right? We have recency bias. Whatever's going on now is everything. It is hard to remember a year or 14 months ago. But before Memphis was destroyed by injuries, they were I know they lost to the Lakers in the playoffs, but that was a really good young team on the rise. Ja is back. They got Zach Edey in the draft. There's some sort of Kennard re-sign. There's some moves on the fringes. Guys coming and going. But assuming Ja Morant can stay on the court, both in terms of health and in terms of not doing things that have nothing to do with basketball that are idiotic and problematic, there's every reason that Memphis can be, for me, a great team, even in this Western Conference this next year.
I agree. So that's the right word you use, forgotten. They just went away. And they have every right to believe they can be a top 4 seed. That's the trajectory that they were trending on, to start being one of these teams that can compete to come out of the West. The thing that you just hope is that, sometimes things just get screwed up and you never get back on track. And you just hope that Ja and all this stuff didn't just throw it off track. It's like the college, you thought you were going to marry this girl in college, and then you took an internship and you went away for 3 months. And when you came back, everything was different. And it's like, you hope that they can get back to the place that they were trending toward. And in large part, had already arrived at that place.
Yes.
They talent wise, they can be, I think they can play now Jackson at the 4, where he's really comfortable next to a big player like they did, with bounce. They've had ways of doing that in the past, and they can do that now theoretically with Edey. But yeah.
Do you like the Edey move? Because I didn't when it first happened, but they need the position. I mean, it is a position of need. By the way, I'm so excited, Brad, to talk to you about the Southwest Division. I forgot. It's a host fail. You should subscribe, like wherever you get your podcast. Go over to our YouTube channel, Beyond the Arc. Give us 5-star reviews over on Apple. Tell everybody how much you love us and how much you enjoy being part of the community we're building here. You can always write questions when we do live shows, which we'll always let you know about, including our YouTube page. So like, subscribe, spread the word. All right, so you don't like Edey. I kind of have come around to I mean, I think it was a reach, but I understand the need of that position. And there are certainly people who work in the game smarter than I am, who I talk to who like it a lot more than I do.
I just, in some ways, I'm kind of primitive when I watch basketball players, and when I watch guys that look like their feet are in cinder blocks and they're not, they just don't look fluid. They don't look coordinated. He's going to be limited defensively. His movement,
And they get out and go, as you know, like
right.
that. Yeah.
I don't, positional need, yes. Play Jackson at the 4, yes. But I just don't think he's going to be that good. I also think they had eyes on Donovan Clingan, and they were going to, there was a lot of talk right in that window of the draft clock, and they were going to trade up. And, it's like at one point, I think it was almost a certainty. And it's like to go from Clingan, who can anchor a defense alongside Jackson, I had my hopes up for that. That was going to be a monster defense. To end up with Edey, I mean, yeah, at some point, 7'4" and whatever he weighs is worth its weight, but I just don't.
He's a big dude.
He's huge. I just don't think that lumbering post half pivot jump hook that he did at Purdue, I just don't think it's going to be a viable source in the NBA. Yeah, he can stand there and protect the rim, but he's not mobile. I could be wrong on this. I just don't think Edey's going to be a very good NBA player.
On the we forget sometimes, and when guys go away or teams fade because guys go away, it's easy to lose track. Ja Morant, if he plays 78 games next year or 75 games, and he plays at the level that he can, he's a top what player in the NBA?
10.
7?
10.
Yeah. 8,
10.
7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, when his shot is at least somewhat dependable.
Serviceable.
When they're giving him all that runway space, the top of the paint, and he can kind of pull up 3 or 4 times a game and hurt you a little bit. He's impossible to guard. After the Olympics, we were all talking about who's going to be the 28th. I mean, this was a guy that was on track to be maybe the best American player. So yeah, Ja Morant's unbelievable. He's the most electric player in the league. I even think he's more electric than Anthony Edwards.
I guess
when
my first instinct is, what are you talking about? But again, you're right. I mean, it's easy to forget. He's amazing.
He's going to the rim, man. He's damn near prime Derrick Rose. He's forceful. He's acrobatic. He does everything at full max height. His hang time is, he can like get up in the air and then do it and then make his decision. He's fantastic. So I'm excited about them with Bane, Jackson, Morant. They have every reason to believe that they can compete in the Western Conference. And you're right. It's all these teams that were like low and they think we're going to make a jump, like the Kings or whatever. You got to throw the Grizzlies. It's like you're looking at last year's teams and you're like, okay,
you've added a new contender. So you took a top 4 team in the East or top 3 team if you're in and you added to the West.
Right.
By the way, you made me think of something. Everything you said about Morant is right. The athleticism, it's electric. It's scintillating. It's also limited in terms of how many years that's going to work. He's not going to be able to do what he's doing when he's 35 years old. He's not going to be able to be 33 years old probably and play at that level. My point is there's a shorter window for Memphis than if you build around certain guys who play a certain way, because he is not a shooter. He's serviceable as a shooter sometimes, but he is sort of like Westbrook. And not to pick on Russ, because I always thought Russ was a little overrated. But like when Russ's athleticism faded a little bit, his game faded a lot. Now we're not there for Morant, right? We have years left if he can stay healthy. But you don't have 10 years. You don't have 7. Like you have to get these years right if you're Ja Morant and if you're Memphis. And what I think will be really important, and I have no way to know, I'm not going to pretend that Ja Morant didn't get suspended in trouble for a variety of gun accusations. And right, I mean, that's a real thing. Does this guy have a sense of urgency now from missing time from injury, from what happened? God, it feels like 20 years ago.
I hope so.
And he has to. Like there has to be from the leader because those guys, and you probably know this talking to guys, those teammates love Ja Morant. I mean, he is a leader in that locker room.
Yeah.
Like they would follow him through a wall. So I'm like, I'd also just like to see Morant from just a focus perspective understand as young as he is. He doesn't have the same timeline as other guys that are at that level of stardom in the NBA.
I think that's a fair point. I think it remains to be seen. I think Westbrook's a great comp. It remains to be seen if he's actually that bad of a shooter. Where Russell Westbrook, we're talking about maybe the worst point guard shooter ever.
Yeah.
It remains to be seen. The other part of that I tend to like, and all these things are subjective. So in my basketball eye, even though we're reporting and watching a game now that's largely positionless, I like teams that don't have too much positional redundancy, that check traditional boxes, and then outside of those boxes, then they can be versatile. But I like that Memphis checks the point guard with Morant, the off guard with Bane, the big guy with Jackson,
all defensive player of the year, quality player,
and they all do. They occupy different spots on the court. Now you have to be versatile from there, and they all are. But I like the teams that check the positional boxes and then branch out from there with their versatility. So I like the foundation of Memphis in terms of their big three. I like the fact that, I think it's difficult when you're three players like the Suns, as good as they are, when you have three players that are largely the same player. I
think Memphis is capable of being twice as good as Phoenix.
I just like that their three best players are all different players. That's what I like.
Their three best players are actually good players too. Bradley Beal's washed. I mean, not that we have to have a Phoenix conversation. I think Beal is also is that a controversial or
I don't know if he's washed, but I do think he's the diminishing return on him in that. Yeah, I think he's a 16, 17 point guy.
The nicer way to say it.
Yeah,
I mean, he gets paid a lot of money to be more than a 16.
He's not what he's being paid. We'll agree on that.
He's not a star. Yeah. Washed for sort of what we thought he was, or maybe what Ishbia thought he was going to be. Best move for me, it's a cop out, but whatever, is just these guys getting healthy and Morant being the primary part of that. I don't have a worse move, but I have a guess. What yours is going to be.
I think I think where they were at in the draft and what they positional need, and you can see the pick, but I just don't like Edey. So I just don't think I don't think that's going to end up being a great pick. If it is, given the fact that he can play the 5 and put Jackson at the 4, then it's the biggest win. But you're right. The wins for the Grizzlies really took place a while back. Like they discovered Gigi Jackson. That it's like that was kind of a gem. They got their wins last year and in the summer, and this year was just about getting healthy now. So Edey, I don't like him. Some people do on sheer size. I just don't think he's gonna be great.
Yeah, it's a reasonable analysis, and time will obviously tell pretty quickly. The last team in the Southwest Division we're going to preview because they had the worst record last year, to me, is the most interesting team in the division, which is saying a lot because I'm interested in a lot of these teams. And I think the Spurs might be the most interesting team in the NBA. Maybe I'm getting carried away, but a combination of league pass excellence and just maybe the future is going to come a lot more quickly than we thought. Obviously, Wemby is the main storyline here, but I like Harrison Barnes coming in. I am not a Chris Paul guy, which you may know, or I'm just not.
I know.
Chris and I, right, we've had some, whatever. I love it. I love Chris Paul coming in. They drafted a guy at that position that I think, look, I don't follow college basketball the way the Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander do, but everyone I've talked to thinks it's a nice pick. So I think the Spurs could be really, I think people might be, the casual sports fan, Brad, might be sleeping on how good Wemby was the second half of the year and the leap that he may make this upcoming. I think he could be a top 4 player this year, top 5 player.
Would not disagree with that. Wemby. And to your point, I like that you put in there about being a league pass team because he's just so utterly watchable. It's one of the 5 guys in the league you can't take your eyes off. I love all the kind of the nerd stuff. I mean, the size and the range and the shooting and the skill and all that is obvious, but the ground that he can cover, specifically when he comes out on the perimeter, he can be guarding a guy at the 3-point line and dig down on a penetrator with like one lunge and interrupt his drive. Because that's like all of basketball now is cutting off drives in help lanes and then recovering back out to shooters. And he doesn't have to move. He can just reach down to the driver and then reach back out to the shooter. His range, it's like he changes the geometry of in a way that Steph changed the geometry of the court offensively.
Yes.
He changes like the pool table of NBA defense completely changes with him on the court. So yeah, he's fascinating. I love the Castle pick. And I love that they're looking ahead. They know they're going to eventually have to pay Castle. They know they're eventually going to have to pay Wembanyama, and they're getting ahead of that by stocking up on assets so they can have young, cheap talent. By getting all these picks, by getting in on that DeRozan deal, that Chicago for some reason didn't want to get in on. They just took Giddey. They didn't want to go to the second apron by paying Harrison Barnes, but Harrison Barnes is a good player. But for that,
you also especially for that
2031 swap from the Kings, and then they traded Dillingham to Minnesota, and they got picks back from them. They're stocking their shelves to have all these picks to surround Wembanyama and Castle with affordable talent when they start making max contracts.
A Presti model, right? I think Sam kind of showed the path of this thing. So I had to just look while you're talking. We are doing, and it's not out yet, but you and I and all the NBA staff at CBSSports.com are doing our top 100 players list for this year. And I like it because it's not where they were; it's who they think they'll be when the season ends. And I just looked. I have Wemby at 7, but it's obviously in flux because I didn't have the guts to put him higher. I just to circle back to him, I think that he is capable of being one of the best players potentially. I mean, just in terms of, and again, I think Chris Paul's a really nice. Everywhere Chris Paul goes in the regular season, teams win.
Yeah,
teams just get better. So if the Spurs make a leap from 22 wins to what is a reasonable jump? I mean, is it crazy to think they could be in the mid to high 30s if things?
No.
I think they can win a lot of. I think they can be in contention for a playing spot with a month to go, Brad.
So the when you talk about it actually materializing in actual wins and what Wembanyama brings, I do the last and he's obviously going to be this. I don't know if it's going to be this year. It's certain at some point he will be. I don't know if right now you can go to Wemby on the block or anywhere on the court and 100% guarantee yourself a good shot, and that tends to decide NBA games. So all the stuff he can do is fun, but he gets a lot of points on, putbacks and transition and like circumstantial things when everything's set and you go to him. Now he is already drawing doubles and making the right pass.
Yes.
He's very, very good.
And he's got a much better supporting cast now to maximize the advantage for his team.
And go look at the net rating of the Spurs when Trey Jones was running point. And they were doing that weird thing with Sohan. It's like if he has a point guard on the floor, when he had Jones run, their net differential is like off the chart different. And now he has that with Paul just from stability. I actually think they were a positive team last year. I'd have to look, but I think they were a positive team with Jones and Wemby. So if you just give him a
plus, Wemby and Jones were plus 4.2 according to producer.
Okay, there you go. So if you just give him a functional entry pass, organizational conductor point guard, has proven, to your point, that you can actually win games with him, not be promising, win games, outscore teams. So I don't think it's unreasonable for them to be high 30s, super, super high ceiling, low 40s, maybe a 500.
Right, hit 41.
Yeah,
hit 41.
But the gravy of the Spurs in this offseason is that, like, their wins are like gravy. What they've done to set themselves up to build their roster around Wembanyama for the next 5 to 10 years, in the second apron, you have to have cheap contracts. You can't have 3 max guys. So to have these picks to either use as trade chips or to be able to surround them with cheap talent so you can max out the right guys. Is huge.
Castle has to be that guy though. Like the thing is, they don't have to get all of them right, but they have to draft. Maybe it's Castle. They have to draft somebody who is worthy of being a max guy that they can pair with Wemby.
What I want them to do, Bill, is I want them to start, looking at some of these young players that they have that aren't going to maybe fit in. I think Vassell definitely fits in, but look at some of the young players and the picks that they've accumulated, and for God's sake, go get Darius Garland. He's redundant with.
Oh, that's interesting.
He's redundant with Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. He is so valuable. He is so good. If you
like Garland.
Darius Garland with Wemby, that team right now is playing for a top 6 seed.
Oh, what?
Yes.
No, I mean I want it to be true.
Yes.
Top 6
seed with Darius Garland. You've seen Wembanyama.
And you have to think Wemby's a top 5 player.
With a functional point guard You've seen
Wow.
Darius Garland's an all-star, and he's on.
I think Chris Paul's functional point guard for
I know
19 minutes a game.
That's how good he is with a functional one. Put him with Darius Garland, who's an all-star. Like they would be awesome.
Wow.
Awesome.
All right. Hey, I'm in. I have already made peace with the fact that I'm gonna have to spend summers in San Antonio a lot going forward because they're gonna have a bunch of finals, and the sooner it gets here, the better. Like I'm here for Wemby greatness. Best move, worst move before we get you back to life. Fun stuff. That's fun too.
So best move I think was getting in on the DeRozan deal. They just helped facilitate that. They take Harrison Barnes, but for that they get a pick that Chicago could have gotten. So I think that was the best move. Is lining up their futures and then doing the Timberwolves move to get those picks. And I also think, to your point, getting Chris Paul just for the stability and allow.
That's my best move.
Yeah, allow Wemby to grow in an organized environment.
Yeah, that's my. And I don't really. Maybe
There's
we're copy. I like the moves a lot of these teams have made. All right, bonus question before I let you roll. And Brad, this is fun, dude. This is cool doing this with you.
Yeah.
Which team finishes in this division highest in the Western Conference? Dallas, New Orleans, Houston, Memphis, Spurs. I have an answer already, but I want yours first.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Dallas because it's proven and they have the best foundation for the continuity. Something people overlook in this player movement era. They have continuity. But obviously the Grizzlies are the X factor. But I would go with Dallas.
I'm going Memphis, maybe just to be a little contrarian.
I like that.
But I don't want to lose sight of what they were a couple years ago, unless they give me a reason to. Right?
Yeah.
All right. So all of you that are listening, remember to subscribe, go to our YouTube page, Beyond the Arc, and if you missed Monday's show with me and Brad, A, go and listen, but B, pro tip, because Brad introduced it to me, and I'm going to introduce it to my buddies. You can play a golf round, according to Brad Bakken, where if you drink a beer between tee off and what your final tee green, you get a stroke off your hole, and you can do one per hole.
Yeah.
This revolutionizes golf for me. It's called Bud Golf now.
That's
I
right.
love it.
Be careful. Be careful.
I'm not going to be careful. I'm going to dive in head first. All right, Brad Bakken. By the way, people that are listening can't see this. We matched today accidentally.
I know. We actually look. You could easily sell us as brothers right now.
You really could. All right, pal. Good stuff. He's Brad Bakken. I'm Bill Ryder. We'll see you next week here on Beyond the Arc.